Okay, how's it going, everybody? I hope you're all doing well. Okay, so in this episode, I thought I'd try to say something about Mary Shelley's seminal book, Frankenstein, a novel that she wrote at 19 years of age, by the way. Pretty incredible. Anyway, so if you don't know, the story goes as follows. So compelled to investigate the deepest mysteries of creation and to discover the elixir of life, Victor Frankenstein sets out to create a person in what is one of the most atypical scientific experiments ever performed. But as soon as his work stirs to life and becomes animated, Victor is repulsed by what he sees. He cries out, "I beheld the wretch, the miserable monster whom I had created." So Victor immediately abandons him, leaving his child completely alone in the shambles of a dark workshop. The creature child was never given a name, and he has no social identity and no family. Throughout Shelley's novel, he's simply referred to as the monster and the wretch. The creature is left to fend for himself in the dark woods of Germany. He remains helpless and alone for the rest of his life, becoming more and more bitter and miserable as time goes on. And eventually, of course, he seeks revenge on his cursed creator. At the very end, in the dark waves of the North Pole, he seems to find his peace in suicide. Okay, so now that said, what I want to try to do is to explore a couple of the major themes or issues being presented in this novel. Okay, so the first thing that comes to my mind, something that's clearly important in the story, are all the references to the biblical story Genesis. So, just to take one example, at one point in the story, the monster is made to say this. He says, "Like Adam, I was created apparently united by no link to any other being in existence. But his state was far different from mine in every other respect. He had come forth from the hands of God, a perfect creature, happy and prosperous, guarded by the especial care of his creator. But I was wretched, helpless, and alone." Okay, so what's going on here? Well, let's look at Adam's beginnings first. So in Genesis, Adam, importantly also a one-off creation with no ties to anyone else, wakes up in Eden, right? But here in Eden, in paradise, which is what the word comes close to meaning in Hebrew, what we get is an enclosure of a lush and a fertile garden. A secure place of habitat especially created for him by God, his creator and his caregiver. As the story goes, here in Eden, God caused to grow every tree that was pleasing to the sight and good for food. So God, at this point in time anyway, in this formative stage, is a reliable and providential father, watching out over his creation, providing for his needs, ensuring that Adam is always emotionally and physically satisfied. He's always nearby, always in close communication. And of course, God even goes on to eventually provide Adam with a companion, Eve, the mother of all humankind. Okay, now just imagine the way that Adam feels at this point. Surely he must feel that he's completely united with the universe, right? That the ground of being is in his favor, that it's on his side. In other words, imagine the comfort that he feels in this place of protection and care, and the sort of confidence about himself and optimism about life that this gives him. Since Adam is consistently provided with all the means for comfort and safety, he surely develops a basic sense of trust in his father, and in the world at large. Okay, but now notice how completely different all of this is from Frankenstein's child. I mean, this child wakes up not in Eden, but in hell. In a dark and freezing workshop where he's instantly cast aside by his father and creator, where Victor Frankenstein abandons and neglects all responsibility towards his creation and totally abandons it to a world completely unready to accept it. How absolutely unlike Eden this is, where God was initially somewhat like a mother caring for a newborn. So given such awful neglect, how is it that this poor child, the creature, could ever come to have any basic faith in existence? He can't. And I should add that unlike God, the creature's creator, Victor Frankenstein, is, as one commentator put it, all pride and no providence. So in many ways, Victor is a terrible substitute for the creator God of Genesis. That's to say, he may assume the role of a god, but he fails as a creator of life in being responsible and taking care of what he's brought into existence. By the way, a lot like many scientists seem to do in not taking full responsibility for their penetration into or manipulation of nature. But anyway, to continue. So later in the story, the creature asks Victor, because he's so lonely, to create another monster to be his friend, which of course further parallels the situation Adam had in the Garden of Eden when God created Eve for him. And here too, Victor eventually refuses to do so. So for the second time now, he denies the monster the opportunity to love and to be loved. Now, most of us know what happens, right? And what has been happening throughout. Namely, full of anger and the bitter gall of envy, the creature seeks revenge and declares war against his creator, which takes the form of the murder of those closest to him. And in this way, you might say, and many commentators have, that the creature parallels the fallen angel, Satan, who, in his neglect and bitterness, also declared war against God. Now, is any of this a surprise? Well, not really. We all know very well that a wounded and angry heart almost always turns into a resentful and revengeful one. Actually, you know what? In all of this, for some reason, I'm reminded of what's come to be known as something called attachment theory. A psychological theory first developed by John Bowlby during the 20th century. So, if you don't know, what attachment theory tells us is that without a home, without some love and some attachment at an early age, deep psychological trauma is bound to be the result. And I think we can relate this to the novel. I mean, look at the creature. He has no companions, no apparent ties on earth, no needs provided for. He has no home and no home base, no secure place of habitation. Well, this is exactly how monsters are made. But to continue with attachment theory, what the theory tells us is that children need to form attachments. They need to feel safe and secure from the very get-go. Like Adam in Eden, they need to be made to feel that their basic environment, their immediate surroundings, the ground of their being from which they have come, is for them rather than against them. Actually, all animals need to feel something like this, as evidenced by their clinging to the very first moving objects that they see. and to objects that respond to their signals in a consistent and caring way. Anyway, once established, such attachment has powerful and beneficial effects. It provides a psychological home base from which children can explore their environment. Because of their secure attachment, children will feel brave enough to slowly move away from their caregivers and become acquainted with the world around them. In the long term, it seems beyond question that early, secure attachment produces self-reliant, confident, and less anxious-ridden adults. Well, given all this, given the complete absence of any and all attachment, is it really any wonder Frankenstein's child turned out the way he did? Okay, well, so far I've been talking quite a bit about the monster, but now let me switch to his creator, Victor, because there's a lot to say about him too. Okay, so first of all, I think it's important to notice that Victor's primary motivation in creating a new life is clearly a narcissistic and egoistic one. I mean, he tells us himself. He tells us that he wants a new species to bless him as their creator. Wow. So that's one thing. But there's something else that's also very important to notice about Victor. And here I'm drawing from a really great article I read by Richard Gunderman. So what he says about Victor is interesting. He says that Victor views procreation as a purely technological matter. In other words, as not one as having anything to do with Mother Nature or as falling under the domain of the natural. In other words, Victor's outlook is a reductively scientific one where he sees human life purely in terms of anatomy and ultimately just chemistry. So for him, there's nothing mysterious and sacred about human life. And his dream of animating matter is one that he sees as a purely technical challenge. One that completely circumvents conception and pregnancy and childbirth altogether. Now, what Gunderman says is that we might see, therefore, Victor's bringing forth of life as something like a symbolically masculine act. And what's meant by this is that Victor sees the process of creation as a purely technical operation, one that exercises domination and control over passive and compliant matter. In other words, he sees childbirth as a form of conquest, not as a natural unfolding and a Herculean feat of female endurance that so obviously resists appropriation of any kind. Anyway, what happens when Victor discovers that his creation is not what he thought it would be is that he recoils in disgust for what he takes to be his hideous demeanor. His son lets him down. He won't acknowledge his only child. But in this way, Victor reveals that he's unable to recognize the deepest kind of love, one that puts the created before the creator. And from this moment, we see very clearly who the real monster in the story is. And ultimately, what Gunderman takes Shelley's central message to be is something like a warning to us about the importance of the mother and of motherhood in general. After all, this is a story about a being created by man alone. A story about a man who tries to have a baby without a woman, as another commentator put it. And so, it's a world completely deprived of the feminine. In fact, you might even argue that Victor's project is one that's designed to eliminate the necessity of having any females at all. After all, as I mentioned earlier, he even later denies the creature a female companion. But whatever the correct interpretation is exactly, one thing seems to be clear in the story. Namely, the consequences of maternal absence in the life of such a child are nothing short of disastrous. Well, maybe Frankenstein's creature would never have become a monster in the first place if he had, right from the beginning, had the good grace of enjoying the unconditional love of a mother. And if he had been seen as an out-and-out gift, rather than some sort of product of engineering. Bye for now.